Thank you all for being here. This is the 7th episode of Stefan Frank's Photobook Show. Today's episode is called Trance and Altered States of Mind. I'm Anja of StrudelmediaLive. I just want to tell you a little bit about Stefan. If you don't know Stefan, he has been teaching many classes for StrudelmediaLive. One of them, for example, he finished recently is Poetics of Space. He has taught classes on surrealism in photography. He will have a class coming up in the spring that is called A Photographic Exploration of the Psychogeography of Your City, where you will be exploring the city or town that you live in. And he will also again teach his class on Gestalt theory for photographers. That will be in May. Please check out our classes page. That's where all of our classes are listed. If you have questions, you can simply unmute and ask, or you can put them into the chat. The talk will be about an hour long. And I want to thank Stefan for presenting another one of his great photobook shows. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Thank you so much, Anja. And thank you all for being here. Some familiar faces, many new faces. I'm happy that you join me tonight because it is night in Germany already. For 1 hour of trance. You've probably seen the intro here. This is not what we will be talking about today. Actually, we will be doing something different here. So the topic of today will be, I want you to look at fewer images. Which is a little bit ironic because you're currently in a show that makes you look at images. But let me hear you out. There is actually some scientific fact that greater exposure to visual imagery dulls the senses. Scientists have measured the impact of looking at many images. What they basically found out, when we are flooded with images in the media, we do become a bit numb to it all. So people tend to, the more you expose them to images, the more people tend to forget the images they see. And we actually have physiological proof for that. I'm just mentioning this because we are at this point in time. We are now at 12 point. I want you to look at fewer images. Why do I want this? This is actually the study by John Suler, who is a psychologist who did these kind of screenings. And we are at that point in time. We are at 12.4 trillion photos in the world. Just let this number sink in for a minute. You see on the screen here the first ever developed photo from Joseph Niepce, a French photographer, one of the first people who dealt with photography there. And every year 1.74 trillion photos will be added to it. So around 2030, we will have almost doubled this number with 28.6 trillion photos. So given this physiological fact that the more photos you look at, the less you remember them, it is a good idea to be aware of how this works. And this is something that people have been talking about in photography for a long, long time. This, for example, is a quote by Guy Debord, a French philosopher of the 50s and 60s. And he said, where the real world changes into simple images, the simple images become real beings and effective motivations of hypnotic behavior. What? the board tends to pack a lot of punch into single sentences. So let's dissect this for a minute. The real world changes into simple images. He was talking about how the reality is replaced piece by images of reality. And now these images that we are looking at start to replace the reality behind it. So this was one of his ideas that he had. And if you look at these 12.4 trillion images, this is already in the making. So we're already in the process of replacing the world with the images of the world. So he was always talking about everything becomes image, everything becomes a spectacle. And he said, what good is appears and what appears is good, which is an interesting take to see when you see that so many things are appearing right now. So it also replaces morality. So let's look at the second part of this packed sentence. Simple images become real beings. Real beings? What is he talking about? So you're looking at an image, but suddenly you think it is a real being. When you look at an image, this is usually what happens. We think that things are real that we see in the image. So they take on a life of their own. So this is what he was talking about, that the reality of an image becomes more real than the reality behind it. So, and the third part is the thing that we will be talking about in this show today, because in this way, images become effective motivations of hypnotic behavior. He was, of course, not talking about the images that we will be looking at, but he was talking about advertising, about political propaganda, social control, about manufacturing consent, about different contexts where images are used to reinforce a certain statement. And advertising is the one thing that he was talking about all the time. And he was talking about the picture superiority effect. This is a simple effect that when you look at it in advertising, they all use images. They rarely use words. And the reason for this is that images circumvent all our reflective behaviors. So we're not thinking about images. We react on a very basic level to them. So this hypnotic behavior, this has also some backup in the brain roots of that John Medina formulated. So this picture superiority effect is this one thing that makes advertising so effective. So, and why is it effective? And if you look at advertising, they repeat everything. So everything comes again and again and again. So repetition is the basic mode how advertising functions and how messages in images are enforced. And this is just the process of repeating a message multiple times in order to increase brand awareness and consumer recall. This is the basic functionality of images. And you see that all the time when you walk through the streets, everything gets repeated and everything establishes a visual rhythm here. And this, of course, happens for advertising. And one of the people who was working in advertising was Andy Warhol. So he was well aware of this repetition of this, how images short-circuit our brain. And he was using that to talk about other things, about horrible things like this electric chair. This is, move this away. This is Orange Disaster number 5 from 1963 by Andy Warhol. And here he is short-circuiting again to Guy Debord. If you present pictures like this, suddenly everything becomes a spectacle. So even killing people becomes a spectacle. Repetition has been in photography right from the beginning. This is, of course, Edward Muybridge running at full speed. He did these kinds of photographic analysis of movements, and he's establishing a visual rhythm with his images of where he just photographs people in motion. And this kind of repetition is one way to unfold images in time. And this is an interesting idea, that repetition unfolds images in time. And there is usually we are so used to think that images don't have a temporal dimension. If you look at an image, it arrests time, so it lacks the temporal dimension. But if you put images in a sequence, suddenly you re-add this temporal dimension again. And of course, this is the way you do it. This is another way to do it. This is how film does it. So at the beginning of photography, there was also already this idea that you can just sequence images. And this was also the beginning of film. And again here, this is how images unfold in time in 24 frames per second. So repetition is one way to unfold images in time. Movies are, of course, another one. And exhibitions have been, before the photo book was, let's say, invented, exhibitions were the usual way of how we look at photographs. And exhibitions are different of this because they unfold images in space. You put images on a wall, you walk around. So this means the images are unfolded in space and not in time. And this is pretty much the mindset in which painters operate. And if you remember one of the previous photobook shows where we looked at how painters look at images, painters have a different feel about image. They think about single images, about an image that is devoid of temporal meaning. But a book unfolds in time. You open it, you flap through it, so it unfolds in time, which is an interesting thing to look at. Images that are devoid of time, when you put them in a book, suddenly you re-add this moment of time back to it. So photobook is basically a contradiction. It adds a temporal dimension to a thing which is devoid of a temporal dimension. So when you look at a photo book like this, suddenly there appear things like before and after. This is something that you don't usually have when you look at a single image. You don't have a before and after. You just have this one moment in time. You have a length. Books have different number of pages. You have a certain tempo that you flip through it. You have a rhythm. So suddenly, when you re-add this kind of temporal dimension to something that doesn't have temporal dimension, you start a different conversation. A photo book seen like this is basically a structured period of time, the time that you spent with this book. And this, of course, is basically the definition of music, like in this piece by John Cage, 4 minutes 33, which you see above. And this piece of John Cage is a pianist walks to the stage, opens up the piano, sets a watch and waits for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. He does nothing at all. He doesn't play any music. He just tells you this is a structured amount of time. So thinking about photo books in this way suddenly opens up the idea that we think about photo books in a way that we think about image, like we think about music. So suddenly you look at photo books and look for rhythm, you look for harmony, you look for a melody of a form, a dynamic. How loud or soft are the images? What kind of tonality does it have? And this is basically, and this is something that pretty much every photo book maker knows this relationship to music. Ralph Gibson has this relationship to music, and Awoiska van der Molen, I hope I spell her name right. I say her name right, probably not. So sorry for that. But she also knows this. She also knows about this connection from photo books to music. And this is the reason why she put in her book, The Living Mountain, which we will be talking about today, she put into the book a sheet of music. The music is by Thomas Larcher, who is a Landsmann from Anja, so he also comes from Austria. And he composed a piece of music, and the piece of music is also called The Living Mountain. The Living Mountain is a book about a mountain, and it gets its title from a book by Nan Shepherd. She was a Scottish writer who wrote about her walks through the Cairngorms, which is a part of Scotland. And Awoiska van der Molen was inspired by this book and by her walks through the mountains in Tyrol, in Austria. And she made these photos in there of this mountain. And she sent the finished photos she sent to Thomas Larcher, and Thomas Larcher sat down and then composed this music here. And she put this music right in the middle of the book. It's just a sheet of music that is tucked in here. And the book starts like this. It starts in blackness. And there are a lot of interesting things to notice about this book. The first thing that you notice, it is a small book. It doesn't have a lot of pages. In fact, it only contains 16 images. And it starts in this blackness. And we see the mountain from far away. The other interesting thing to note is that these images, which you probably can't see here properly, there are two kinds of images here. So one are printed on the coated page, which you see because it's reflecting heavily, and this is the backside of this page. And here, this is a matte backside of the paper and an uncoated paper. So you have a different feel from here to here. And she's purposefully printing images in these two modes here. And of course, the whole idea of this book is to talk about what is the livingness of a mountain. So she photographed the mountain from afar, but she also goes closer to it. She examined the texture of the mountain. And for this, here the idea to have different textures that show images in different ways are very important. This is very glossy. This is very matte. So, and this is the way we move through the image. moving from overview shots to close-up shots like this until we end up at the music. So here we now hear the sound of the mountain. Here we are looking at the inner workings of the mountain. And this is why I was talking about music. The idea of music repeats here. So looking at comparison at things like this, you see that she has similar structural forms here, the way she composes it. And this establishes a kind of a rhythm that lures us into this book. So we are moving up the mountain. Suddenly we go from this, here we go from these dark pictures and from the pictures that that show the ascent on the mountain. Now we're going up the mountain, going into the snow. And this is an interesting picture because she's a very good photographer, and she doesn't do anything by chance, but you probably see that this picture is blurry. And if you remember that we're talking about a living mountain, so this is about the movement of the mountain. So here she supports the idea of living by the blurriness. So we're going up, up, up. This is an interesting picture, which I do not know if you probably see this sign here on the upside, on the upper part of the image. This is an interesting picture because it is the only sign of human presence here. So now she goes back to this inward. So with pictures like this, it almost looks like a tooth, this structure in here. So all of this is about the life of the mountain. And this is the only double spread here. And it's interesting to compare these pages and this. You probably see this. Let's see if you can get this to in an unreflected way, because this is painted, this is printed on the glossy side. You see that we are looking down the mountain here. And again, if you compare this to these images from the beginning, here we are going up. So here she photographs upward. So the whole book has this movement from I ascend, and then I reach the pinnacle, so the top of the mountain, and the top of the mountain is where we hear the music, and then we're going down on the other side. And this is the last image of the book. And the last image of the book, here we are, this again reflects the first image of the book, where we are going closer to the mountain, and here we are leaving the mountain. So this is a wonderful short sequence that shows all these features of how you compose a photo book, and how it is very similar to how you compose a piece of music. And of course, the structure is reflected here then in the music here. Great book, Living Mountain, Awoiska van der Molen. I will not go deeper into this Blanco. She does this kind of photography. She has a lot of these books. She has made 3 of these books. This is Blanco, which has a different topic. There's also Sequester from her. If you compare these 2 books, so this has a wonderful structure that brings up this idea of music into the structure of the photo book. I find her other books are a little bit there. I think the images are a little bit more disparate, not fitting as good together and not as consistent as this one. but the images themselves are a little bit better. So I'm really interested to see where she takes this. So what's next from her? It's also interesting to see if you, I think Anya already posted her website. It's interesting if you see her images in exhibition. She shows these images in an exhibition in a very different form. But let's come to this. So this is Diana Michener Trance. This is where this little show has got its title from. And I was talking so much about the idea of trance and what images do with you, because it is a weird title to put this title, Trance, on a book with landscape photos. And I will try to explain why she did this. So this is, I have to pull you a little bit up. So this is Trance. This is a heavy book. This is big. It comes in this schuber, in this holdout, and it has this texture right on the cover, and pretty much nothing else. So there's no title on this. And this is Steidl. So Awoiska van der Molen is forward press, a tiny little bookmaker. Steidl is, of course, one of the greater bookmakers, and he's making this, he specialized in this huge coffee table sized, wonderfully printed books. And he doesn't make interesting books. So most Steidl books are made pretty boring. They are made pretty straightforward. So he focuses on printing the images good. And this is why everything here is just screams just quality and slowness, or even the size of the book. And let me zoom you in onto this. Onto this here. She put this quote by Henri Frédéric Amiel in the front, because in contrast to Awoiska van der Molen, which is all about the life of the mountain, this book is, strangely enough, although it contains only landscape images, it is only about her. So here it is about the landscape as a psychological landscape, an inner landscape. And this idea of trance, that it lures you into some kind of trance, this is reflected in the size of the book, because everything slows you down. The turning a page just slows you down. And this book contains pictures from national parks in the US, but also from places in Israel, places in Spain. And she does not locate these places. So there are no headings to these places. So we never know where we are, because she always wants to enforce the idea this is a landscape of the spirit. This is the starting image, and I want you to keep in mind this starting image, because it has this tiny little speck of horizon that you see here on the edge. This idea of horizon will reappear in the book. Here it is vanished completely, and only if you look very close to it. And well, let me zoom you into this, because I want to replicate a little bit how we experience these kinds of images, because they are so great that you can just zoom into them. And once you zoom into them, suddenly you see, okay, this is not I'm not looking down here, but this is a mountain, and I'm looking on the side of the mountain, and the mountain blocks my view. So the horizon here is present in the way that it is not present because the mountain blocks it. And she has a couple of these pictures at the beginning of this book. This is one of the few close-up shots we have here. But right at the beginning, she introduces this kinds of human structures here. So this is some kind of ruin that we see here. So she introduces the idea of settlement very early in the book, some kind of human presence. Whereas in Awoiska Thunderbolts, is why I combined these two books, the sign of humans looks almost like an accident. Here it is done purposefully. Even here you see in this wonderful, oops, I show you, this is one of the few double spread that you see in this book. But you do not only see these mountain structures here that repeat again. Here again, she's working with this kind of repetition at several parts in the books, but you also see this marks of cars that are going through here. So she's not hiding the presence of human beings, like you see in lots of other landscape photography. So this presence of human beings, this is part of these images. You also have these kinds of paths that you see here, and you see the paths returning in a couple of images. Let me get back to this first image because it is already introduced here in the first image. You can only see this in the background, that there is a path that goes in here. And just like Awoiska Thunderbolt, who introduced us into the mountain, she's introducing us into this book by going this path here and then eventually ending up at this point. So the idea of walking through the landscape, this is very present in this. And again, she talks in the afterword of this image, she talks about this idea of the horizon, that you always point your, when you walk through a landscape, you always orient yourself via the horizon here. So this is why the horizon, it is just repeated all the time. So it gives this book its presence, the way the horizon moves up and down through the landscape. Here again, this tiny little speck of human presence. And whenever you see landscape photography, like the living mountain and the idea that landscape is living, we always compare our own life cycle to the life cycle of the earth, and how it's only a blink of an eye that we spend in this landscape, and the landscape will still be there long after we're all gone. This is why these pictures from the cemetery start appearing here. But she's not afraid of human presence. Here is another picture which clearly shows a human presence. But it's also always in a way that puts humans in some kind of perspective. So they are used for comparison, how small they are compared to the earth they are inhabiting, to the landscape they are inhabiting. She's also placing these images in a history of photography. this is one of the first shots where you immediately recognize some of the themes of landscape photography, like photographers like Mark Rudell, who photographed the exploration of the West by photographing these trains that crisscross through America. So she's quoting him here. They were pretty close. Again, here is this movement through the landscape that is repeated. Other traces of human doings that crisscross the landscape. Here you see some visual similarities where she compares the flow of water on this image with the flow of humans through these landscapes. All of this book is about size. It is about the vastness of the landscape. So this is where these double spreads come into play, because they are some kind of panorama. So this is a picture about our inability to photograph the whole world. So you stand in a place and you want to take in everything. This is what drives us to make these kind of panoramas where we want to take everything in. And of course, this also talks about the futility of this attempt, because you cannot take everything in. And once we were lured into this slow rhythm of moving through the landscape, we arrive at this place. And this place is an almost religious moment in this book. This is not only is it about the sun coming up, but this is about the joy of a photographer that sees that has been waiting for the sun to come up and to illuminate the scenes. She speaks about this in the afterword of this book. But it is also about how we always look into landscape and contemplate landscape in a way to find something that is bigger than us. The idea of contemplation is present in almost every religion. It is present in Christian religions, but it's also present in Islam and Buddhism. The idea of standing at a place and looking at something for a really, really long time and immersing yourself into this. And this is one of the pictures where this book culminates in this almost religious moment. And this comes very close to the end of this book. And she does not leave on this note, but she leaves in a very similar arc to what you saw from Awoiska van der Molen, that she has this in the middle and then she leads us out of the book again. Again, more photographic history here. This is a reminder of another photographer of the American West, of Timothy O'Sullivan. This is a reminder of his picture Walls of the Grand Canyon. Could be probably taken at the very same place. So here again, establishing a rhythm, repeating the forms that she has introduced in the beginning. And then it gets darker again, and we're led out of the landscape. And before she leaves us, she reminds us again of our mortality. Again, more photographic quotes. Of course, all these cemetery places in the American West, they are always a reminder of Ansel Adams, of his picture Moonrise over Hernandez. And the light is coming back. And this is a last picture of the book. And this is just where whenever I look at this picture, I get goosebumps because this is such a great picture. And it is becoming even greater when I realized we end where we started. So this is actually a loop. So we came this way. And now we are walking back this way because this is the same place. And we end up here and leaving the landscape. So this is a quote that I mentioned. Landscape, horizon line, the moment sky meets land or water. Symbolically, we stand confined or expanded by a relationship to this line. And it's interesting to see this quote at the end of this picture because she reveals the structure of the photo of her book at the end of all her images. So now we see, okay, this is the way she constructed the book. And it is an interesting quote if you think about it, when everything in this book is always about the positions of humans in this landscape. And if you think about the horizon doesn't really exist. There is no place where the heavens and the earth are divided. It's just where we stand and where we look at that, we are creating the horizon by standing in a particular place and looking at the earth in a certain way. So, wonderful book. And I get it. So when you flip through this book, I get why this is called Trance. Because it is about this immersion into landscape, and everything in this book, every decision that was made by the size, starting with the way the pictures are placed, everything is about this idea of inducing some kind of trance state, a certain state of immersion into the landscape. And before I send you out, because we make a similar turn, because we have been into this weird way of talking about landscape, talking about living mountains and horizon lines, I want to lead you back into the city and back into the civilization. This is Candlestick Point by Lewis Baltz. And we will not look at this book as a whole. I just want to show you the beginning of it, because Lewis Baltz, photographer in the 50s and 60s, this is something that he did in the 80s. He has a very filmic way of going through the landscape. So here repetition takes on another form. It takes a form of walking along a shoreline and photographing just everything. So it's like a long introductory shot into this art, into this abandoned industrial site that is photographing. And we will not look at this book in this form, but we will look at this book in this form. It's hard to get any books by Lewis Baltz because everything is almost out of print. His most famous books, the prototype works, and they are not available anymore. So when I began talking about Steidl, that they are only doing boring, straightforward photo books. This is neither boring nor straightforward. This is Common Objects, which looks at Lewis Baltz from a filmic point of view. He is one of the photographers that has the most connections to film. This is why this book introduces these connections to Alfred Hitchcock, Michelangelo Antonioni, and Jean-Luc Godard. And he does it, the book does it in a very interesting way by adding transparent pages in here. And these transparent pages are taken from the movies. This is from the introductory scene of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Phoenix, Arizona. And this way, these filmic, these film strips can overlay the images by Lewis Baltz. So this book takes pictures, takes projects by Lewis Baltz and places them in a context of film. And this is why we're looking at Candlestick Point in this way. Les Carabiniers is a film by Jean-Luc Godard, and it's a film about two soldiers that come back, that go into the war and come back from the war with a suitcase full of photos, a suitcase full of postcards. And there is a scene in Les Carabiniers where these two soldiers that just slam these photobooks, these postcards on the bed. And they say, we've been in the war and we brought back photos of monuments and photos of women and photos of the great men of these nations. And this is what we brought back. So the photos here become some kind of trophies that these men bring back from the war. And here, this way of showing this short circuits these images together with this abandoned industrial site that Lewis Baltz photographed. And this is the way the whole book is laid out. And this contains all the images of the book. And this way, this cycle of images are short-circuited with the industrial production of mass goods is short-circuited with the industrial production of mass media. And this is what this book does wonderfully by just superimposing these on the images. And this adds another layer to this work by Lewis Baltz. It also contains some of the images that you find in the book, but it's also about these superimposed images that are taken from the movies. So again, this is an interesting book, and this leads you into this idea of film and photography that Anya and Edward are always talking about in their courses about film and photography. And this is where we already end. So I can talk a little bit more about this book. It contains a lot of almost all the important projects of Lewis Baltz, and this is one of the few books that you can still buy with images of Lewis Baltz. The other stuff that you get from Lewis Baltz, this is practically unaffordable. There is a complete edition of his books, but it costs about 1,000 euros. So you have to spend a lot of money on Lewis Baltz if you want to get your hands onto the real books. But this is as good as it gets if you want to get an introduction to Lewis Baltz, and this is still somewhat affordable and adds another layer to it. And we end back in reality. We started with trance and end in reality. And this is the last picture that I have for you. Okay. Do you have any questions, comments?
Let me stop the spotlight screen. Okay. I have a question.
Sure, shoot.
My question is if you could talk a little more about why you feel that Steidl books are boring. I'm assuming you don't mean the photographers or the photographs, but what do you find boring about Steidl books?
Steidl he is a really, really, really good printer. So he is very, so all his books are about giving the books, giving the photographs room to breathe. So this is why they are boring. So if you look at the structure from Steidl, this is a pretty straightforward photo book. So it's just one picture on a page, a lot of white space around it. And if you look at a lot of the Steidl books, almost all the Steidl books are like this. They are printed beautifully, they are beautifully made up, but they have, most of the time, they have this kind of structure. And this is supported even by the fact that he has a lot of these household names of photography, like Agnes. And they come from a time when the photo book was was just starting to be some kind of artistic expression. And so he's always showing these images in a very straightforward way. If you could look at candlestick point is the same. It's just picture after picture after picture. Everything is beautifully printed. Sometimes you get a fold out, but it's very straightforward presentation. And I don't think, compare it with Awoiska Molen and forward pressing, I don't think that he would arrive at ideas like this. I just put a sheet of music into the middle of a photo book. What does it have to do in a photo book? And he would most certainly not do something like this, print a photo on the matte side of the paper and let the ink sink into the paper. And he would also probably not show pictures like this where most of the picture is just blackened out. I do not mean this being boring in a bad way. I think it's a good way. I think he's boring in a good way because this trance, for example, it needs this. It doesn't need any bells and whistles. It needs to be straightforward, simple. It needs to be big and needs to be a proper, needs to give the images room to breathe and not have any fancy stuff around them. So this is why I find him boring, but I find him boring. I find Steidl books boring in a good way.
Any other questions?
I have a comment. Being a consumer of photo books, I got a catalog yesterday from Steidl, which actually was a hardback catalog.
Okay.
And with it was which I'm going to include in my collection, and included in it was a pamphlet of their new printer. Oh my goodness. I have never seen such a machine in my life. I mean, it looked like a train car. It looked like a train caboose. It was just a truly extraordinary. And it was just interesting that they had dedicated a whole pamphlet nicely printed to this machine, the arrival of it, and the setting up of it.
Sheila, come to Germany. We go to Göttingen and visit the print shop. He's organizing visits to the print shop because he's so proud on this machine.
All right, that's a deal.
Sounds like a good idea. All right, anybody else?
Sheila, would you agree with this assessment that Steidl books are a little bit straightforward and a little bit boring?
I would, but you kind of overlook it in the quality of the presentation.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely quality binding, beautiful paper. I mean, yeah, I'm always aware of paper.
Yeah. I'm not so fond of the binding here because it starts falling apart eventually. So these flap out pages, they are not so stable. So this is something to be aware of if you do this kind of thing. Even Steidl, who is very good at this, he can't make this stable, so they fall apart eventually.
Yeah.
All right, Stefan, thank you so much. Wow, again, so many interesting books. I mean, that one with Antonioni and Hitchcock, I thought that was very fascinating.
Yeah, I just especially picked this out for the two of you because you're so into movies and photography. So this is it includes it has a very nice essay by David Campany in the end on cinema and the intuition of nothing. The essay is more about the Diana Michener book than the pictures are, but this is where the connection comes from this essay. So this really is something, and it is still available and affordable. So somewhat affordable.
Well, that's good news too. Any other questions? All right. Stefan, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining. And Stefan will do another photo book show probably in a month or so. You sign our mailing list in case you're not on it, so we can send you the newsletter for his next photo book show. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.